Deborah, because you read a poem about green, I just happened to also be ready to read a poem about green. I guess it must be the season that everybody's hoping for, spring to spring. I was at the Leighton Studios at the Banff Center for the Arts several years back, quite a few years back now. And I had a studio overlooking a ravine, and I had mountains in the background, and I sat there for a month looking at green. And so this is the poem that came out of that experience, and it's kind of a meditation on the color. It starts with a tranquil thread, a few more, then more and more. A landscape is woven in. Nature's ubiquitous wick announces itself in the invading grass, grain-laden fields, in the commanding canopy of a forest, the primal wash of the sea. It demands attention in the edible vegetable world. It marries every single flower. Hope claims it, offering renewal, reproduction, youth. Nothing can surpass it. It is impossible to count its hues and shades and tints. It is the color of vines and pines, ferns and frogs, of stems and stalks. It expresses love, justice, the infancy of the world, the light of the spirit. It blossoms inside me. But there are days relentless in their lack of promise, when the ambivalent fuse of joy turns toward nausea, envy, ignorance. It becomes a poisonous snake, some slime, mold, pus, bad baloney. It is a cancerous tumor, a maturing bruise, disemboweled viscera. Corrosive, it eats away at my life. It is a paradox I cannot get my mind around. In the midst of all this life, why so many thoughts of death? I try to get back that thread of inspiration. What stops me? Like Nero peering through a polished emerald to watch starving lions devour Christians, I indulge it. The malignance, the malaise, the mystery. I am gullible to its charms. Stripped of everything good in this world, I wait for a single tendril to emerge. I'll wait all day if I must, for the sedge and the spruce and the sage. This next poem is just one section of a much longer poem, but the section holds together all on its own. It's about the myth of Daphne, and to give you just a quick gloss on that in case you have forgotten. Apollo angers Cupid, and Cupid, in order to punish him and take revenge, shoots him with a gold-tipped arrow, and it makes him fall madly in love with Daphne. At the same time, he shoots Daphne with a leaden arrow, which makes her reject the advances of any man. Apollo, of course, being a god, is not going to be denied, so he's chasing her and chasing her and chasing her through the forest, and the moment at which she realizes that she cannot get away, she prays to the gods, who grant her her wish, but turn her into a laurel tree. Entering the landscape. The gods grow lean, disappearing a split second before he reaches her. Daphne metamorphoses right there on the riverbank, earth and water joining forces so that the laurel will thrive, so that Apollo, starved of love by Cupid's wrathful arrow, will have to watch as her feet turn to roots that churn into packed black earth, as bark girds her girlish frame, rises from toes to knees to stomach, bark stretching up her fingers to her wrists, to her trembling arms, bark spreading slowly upwards to her tender chest, her pale, pale neck, bark inching higher to obliterate her face, Apollo, dumbstruck by the weight of her slowly petrified flesh, by the suddenly cold heart, the rigid jaw, blocked ears, by the unblinking eyes, the wooden thighs, the newly unmoving lips. The god's eyes widen as she dips and bends, as her green skirt sways, her mythic limbs rising as a lover's might. But he turns away when he tries to touch her cheek, touches a blossoming pink twig, touches her leathery leaves, those crooked, unyielding boughs. The next piece I'm going to read is a relatively new poem. I've been writing a series of labyrinth poems, and in this particular piece, instead of the classic Greek labyrinth where you have the Minotaur in the center, this labyrinth is an Amazonian forest. And it's basically a list poem, and so the cumulative images are kind of used to echo the kind of seemingly endless turns that you see in a labyrinth. Labyrinth. Rain frog, thorn bug, tent back, along a broken mosaic, a spongy, ever-dwindling path, soaring trees, woody buttresses, their massive twisting fins, lofty crowns, shoulder to shoulder, climbing lime green vines, restless palms, one strangling plant, clinging to, choking another, a discontinuous canopy of branches and leaves, impenetrable, alive and teeming, tangled underbrush, the deeply shaded soil, lumpy roots, writhing across the forest floor, jewel-colored hummingbirds, insects sizzling and clicking, and the dripping water trickling into the tiniest of crevices, steamy, claustrophobic air, a dazzling bellbird lost in a shaft of sunlight, a golden eyelash viper, sinuous as a vein on a broad-leafed frond, flatworms, land leeches, walnut-sized spider, Goliath beetles, camouflaged butterflies on dead leaves, parasites, bees, leaf-cutting ants atop glorious white lilies, everywhere, gripping, climbing, twisting, floating through the trees, stilt-like aerial roots, the mouth-amazed pitcher plant, buried larvae, fruit-eating fish, the perpetual battle to adapt, the ruthless drive to survive under a punishing sun. What grows bursts forth at astonishing speed, then decomposes only to be reabsorbed. So much unknown, unfamiliar, unnamed. But before long, the trees seem the same, the rocks, every bird track. Who would dare think of such a place? Who would dare construct one of his own imagining and be utterly abandoned in the middle of it all? If to be lost is to be fully present, if confusion becomes the only boundary, and then the decision to divide space until a direction is created, only a madman would begin. Thought is its own cage, the mind already anticipating the first step, deciding every turn will be coupled by disaster, and perhaps some monstrous creature crouched at the center, crying, waiting for our hero, our everyman, our Elijah, wandering the world in rags. The last two poems that I'll be reading are from Nude in Winter, which is a collection of poems that are ekphrastic poems, which simply means poems written in response to visual art. This first piece is based on a painting by Frida Kahlo. As most of you know, she was a Mexican painter Her life was marked by a lot of physical suffering. When she was, I think, in her early 20s, she was in a bus accident and a pole pierced her from stomach to navel. And over the course of her life, she had, I think, like 32 different surgeries. She had to wear these very uncomfortable corsets. Many of her paintings, in fact, were done when she was in bed, lying flat on her back. This particular piece, because usually when I read from this book, I have a slideshow so you can see the paintings that I've written about, but I'll just describe it. There's a forest in the background. In the front is a stag with 9 arrows in its hide, and the face of the deer is the face of Callow herself. The little heart, H-A-R-T. After 9 downturned arrows pierce the heart's warm hide, 1 arrow for each muse, 1 for each of the 9 heavens, the 9 planes of hell, the 9 gods of darkness, the 9 stages through which the soul passes to find rest, the 9 months, the children she miscarried, needed but never had. She stands alone on the forest floor, stunned by the blood, by the penetration, the arrow's aim, the force of its impact, the strength of whoever it was drew the bow time and time again. She stands resigned once again to her fate, to the torment which will not be assuaged, the disfiguring plaster jackets, the repeated surgeries, the confinements, the husband's affairs. Oh, slaughtered stag with lyre-shaped antlers. Oh, tree of life, shorn to a single green bough and laid at her feet. Sorry, I'm just fighting a cold. My voice is a little rough. The last poem I'm going to read is the title poem from Nude in Winter. The photograph that I wrote about was by Craig Blacklock. As I'm sure most everybody in the room knows, he is a very famous nature photographer in Minnesota. But in 2004, he published a book called A Voice Within the Lake Superior Nudes. His wife, Honey, posed during all 4 seasons along the shores of Lake Superior. I was at the Blacklock Nature Sanctuary as a resident, and he showed me the photos. He was interested to see what I thought about them and just to show me what he was doing. And I was particularly interested in the winter photos. This particular piece is Honey. You can see her face on this. And she's standing under this absolute cage of ice. And she's, of course, nude. And you can see that the ice is just beginning to melt. Unfortunately, when I wrote the poem, the lake turned into a river, but that was the inspiration for this poem. Nude in Winter. This is a story about the self, the body guarded by thick tusks of ice, glistening knife tips, the ogre's dripping teeth. The naked body tells a story about frozen space and the vertical hours which run on endlessly, about the soul entombed in ice, about the blameless cage of the mind, each thought cold and clear and sharpened by constraint, about desire, how it melts what it touches, and the unexpected pivot of energy when the sleeping body is about to wake, when the polished river of the body is about to wake, when ice weakens at the edges, creaks and strains, shudders and cracks, and in one godlike roar breaks apart until great blocks float free, collide and shatter and overturn, flows piling up, ice screeching, the grinding ice careening downstream, slamming into banks, shearing off bare branches, stripping bark as it is swept along, as water is unleashed, as water fills the mouth, spills from the eyes, flows like milk from a breast, water gushing back to earth, feeding the soil, feeding the black seed until it explodes into green and bursts forth into the world with its dignity and power and its brutal beauty. Thank you.